Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Lawyer, Money, and You. I'm Roberta Saphire, an attorney in Sharon, Massachusetts.
Hi, and I'm Camille Barron. I'm a healthcare advisor and financial coordinator also in Sharon, Massachusetts. And we have someone who's here for the first time, Roberta, and we're very, very pleased to have him on our show today.
Yes, I am very happy, and I feel like I've known you for a long time because you're Veronica's husband, Veronica Wiseman, who has been on the show. We've gone to her shows. In fact, Camille and I did our first appearance about 11, 12 years ago. It was on Veronica's show. And
Wow.
she is just wonderful. And your daughter's been on too. You got a family with a lot to say, but you have quite,
Hard to get a word in edgewise.
yeah. Oh, you're
Well,
very
today, Roberta,
interesting.
today we're going to be able to have Howard recognized not just as Veronica's husband.
Yes,
He'll
indeed.
have an identity all his own.
I do.
Oh, and I would say so. He'll have an identity anybody's own. Uh, well, let's get right into it. We might need more than one interview with you.
Well,
You've got so much here. It's amazing for one person. Why don't we start with two things? You're an international trade. And an attorney, but let's do the international trade. Tell us about it.
well, I'm the president of Mercury International Trading Corporation. It's a company that was founded by my dad in 1979 in Sharon. And let me just stop the dinging here. In the basement of our house on Owl Drive. And it specialized in the athletic shoe business back in the late 70s. And we've been a primary resource for global brands and international retail companies, getting them shoes from Asia to put into the stores for a long time. And
Fascinating. How did the COVID affect, or did it affect, or how do you get around that, and how do you do
it's
this?
still affecting us. Our manufacturing is predominantly in Vietnam and China. And in Vietnam, we actually own and operate several factories with approaching 3,000 workers right now. Um, and in China, we contract with third parties who make shoes for us. The pandemic started in China, obviously, almost year and a half ago, and they got shut down in late January and February, which was very disruptive, obviously, to not only our trade, but all of international trade. But the consequences of them shutting down early is if they reopened early. And so by the time we were in the midst of our pandemic, our operations in Asia had somewhat normalized. And so we were able to continue providing a stream of goods. There were enormous disruptions, obviously, to consumers and the way people, bought goods and the demand for goods. So there was a lot of cancellations and a lot of schedule changes. So, from that point of view, it was quite disruptive. We never had any kind of pandemic within our own organization. We were always very careful. Which sort of brings me to where we are now. We have a rather large operation in Vietnam, and unlike China, which had significant access to a vaccine, Vietnam has about 100 million people, and only a couple of million are vaccinated right now, and they are being struck pretty hard at the moment by the Delta variant of the COVID virus, and so there's just rolling shutdowns all over the countryside. Um, so we're dealing with manufacturing disruptions still to this day in Asia. The other thing that happened is as the world, Western Europe and the U.S., started to come out of the pandemic, and people had a lot of money in their pockets, they started buying stuff. Particularly, they bought a lot of shoes, and so there's been everyone cut back their purchasing during the pandemic, and so what the
Lighting problems again.
Yeah, well, gives us a chance to think of things. Who bought the shoes? The Vietnamese people or people here?
actually we do business with Reebok, New Balance, Puma,
you
So
do
there's
their
a
shoes?
global market for these products.
Do you do their shoes or part of their shoes?
Yeah, we manufacture, we do some, we're a very small part of their total supply chain, but we do manufacture for them.
I was wondering, did our government tell you, well, you can't do this anymore because you could be bringing in the virus, or did that disrupt anything at all?
No, there was really, I think pretty early on, it was well understood that, this light's not going to stay on. All right, let's turn on this light then, see if that's better.
Good.
Better than nothing.
Oh, it looks good.
There was pretty well understood that cartons, boxes, that this was a respiratory virus and not a physical on the surface virus, and so there were very few limitations on actually moving goods around. It was just a matter of getting them made and getting them moving. We're now faced with a tremendous shortages in our supply chain. It's very difficult to even get shipping containers to move goods from Asia to the US.
Wow.
It's taking a long time. There's enormous backlogs, and there's been this incredible jump in demand for products, not just shoes, but everything from computers to iPhones to you name it. People have had a lot of money in their pocket from the government subsidies, and people are spending. I mean, it's the American way. I mean, if you still have any availability on your credit card, you're not broke.
Do they have, we noticed too, like from our business there, that in fact, all over the country, because of these stimuluses, and people are not going back to work because they make more money on unemployment. Have you had a problem with that, or they don't?
No, I mean, our U.S. Group, we didn't ever shut down in the U.S. So our team stayed intact here. In Asia, there are significant labor shortages all over the place. People think of Asia as just with an unlimited supply of people and labor, and it's not exactly true. There are labor shortages, and there are materials and other shortages going on there. So
why do you have those shortages there? I mean, here you see they don't want to go back to work, but they don't. Do they get anything like that?
No, they got nothing of the sort. But the industry has grown so rapidly in these countries. And at our end of the trade spectrum, our jobs would be considered middle to lower pay jobs to work in a shoe factory. And so as the industrialization has occurred in these Asian countries, and they're making higher value products, it's getting harder and harder to attract people into the hand trades like shoemaking.
A question about this. We hear a lot about trade wars and China this and China that. Can you kind of boil it down to the essentials for some who really are not familiar with all of that?
Sure, and it's a real, and this has had probably a bigger impact on our business than COVID. The previous administration, in a very misguided approach, raised the customs duties on a number of different products coming into the country from all over the world, but particularly China and other parts of Asia. And what that means is that if you import a pair of shoes that are a $20 shoe, the normal duty rate on that shoe is around 10%. So you would have the cost of that shoe to actually import would be $22. The $20 that would get paid to the producer, and the $2 that you would pay to the U.S. Treasury for the privilege of importing. Well, the government raised that from $2 to almost $6 per pair. And a rough rule of thumb is that you can take every dollar of increase is probably $5 or $6 at retail, typically. So there was this radical increase in the cost of goods coming, particularly from China. So what that did is, there are other countries that did not get hit by this politically driven customs duty, like Vietnam. And so we saw this tremendous pressure to move production out of China and into Vietnam, where the duty rates were lower. simply not enough capacity to absorb. China is this absolute monolith, in international trade, and there's absolutely no other country in the world that can substitute for the productive power of China. So, trying to move goods to sustain duty advantages was a really difficult and disruptive thing. And in the end, it's the U.S. consumer that ends up paying these increased prices. It didn't cost the Chinese government anything when the United States raised their duties. The additional duty money goes to the U.S. Treasury, and the companies that sell goods were just increasing their prices to consumers to cover that cost. So this was really a direct transfer from the U.S. consumer to the U.S. Treasury, and had and very little to do with the Chinese and the political situation with the Chinese.
Was that the time when the tariffs were imposed?
Yes, yeah.
Mm.
And and the tariffs are still in place. And I think
was gonna say, what is it now? Are they still high?
they're still there. The same tariffs are still in place. And I think you have a political situation now where, the Biden administration cannot be perceived as being weak on China. And, the public, doesn't really have a clear understanding of how tariffs work. And so they would perceive any reduction in tariffs not as a savings to them, but as some sort of a capitulation to the Chinese.
Mm.
And that's politically just not viable for the Biden administration right now.
Isn't that something? How did you have to fly over there? And if you did, how did you do that when they wouldn't let you?
Well, I would normally travel over there 5 or 6 times a year for a few weeks at a time. And there was a great flight out of Boston that was nonstop to Hong Kong, and that I would take. It was a 15-hour flight, but you get used to it.
Right.
And we got shut down. All of our travel, international travel, got shut down. And in fact, I was planning a trip to Vietnam, at the end during May of this year. And this was at the time that the Indian or the Delta virus started to come back into Vietnam. And I'm at the airport in New York about to fly to Vietnam. And it took an enormous amount of work to get my paperwork in order. And I get a call from my office that they've increased the quarantine from 14 days to 28 days. So it would have been 28 days in a hotel, a government hotel, before I could even leave the premises to go and work. And at that point, I got back on a plane back to Boston and said, I'll go. I was willing to stay in a hotel for 14 days because there was a lot of work to do, but I was not willing to stay in a hotel for 28 days.
Is there a way you could do the business through Zoom or FaceTime?
We have adjusted, obviously, using the communication technologies that we've been able to put together. I am, a firm believer that there's no substitute for presence, particularly when you have remote teams that you're counting on to make judgments. It's one of the interesting things about an international business is that someone once told me early on. He said that every branch office is in a conspiracy against the home office. And well, that's a little excessive. What is true is that you will always get a very filtered form of information from your colleagues who are remote. They don't want to trouble you with their problems. They want to appear competent. They don't want to admit if a mistake has been made. There's all kinds of reasons why you get a very much edited version of reality, even from your own team. And you try and rely on data because the data doesn't lie. But as I said, there's still no substitute for going over. It never fails that when I travel overseas and meet with my teams, that I find out things that I never would have learned or knew otherwise. And it just makes you more effective. The other part of it is just the aspect of being connected with your fellows, and the sense that we're all engaged in a joint enterprise together. We have common goals, and that the team concept really is a true thing.
How many employees do you have in those remote locations?
Well, and I have about 30 people in our offices in China. I have 3 people in the UK. I've got 10 people in the US, and I've got an executive team in Vietnam of about 50, and a bunch of manufacturing staff,
Mhm.
obviously that are making shoes for us.
Yeah.
What's the average wage for the manufacturing worker in those places? Because I remember, before you give me an answer, I remember 30, 40 years ago, China being one of the places they used to make it. Everything was made in China.
Yeah, and labor costs have gone, look, I mean, the particularly these labor intensive products like footwear moved overseas a long time ago. And when that first started to happen, there were enormous advantages in terms of labor costs between here and the West and these foreign countries. They were filled with young people. They were predominantly agricultural societies. Now they are, bustling industrial societies. There's competition for talented people with good educations, and wages have gone up significantly. So, if you look at the managerial staff wages, those folks can, they're not making quite as much as a U.S. person would make in a similar job, but a senior manager is definitely making 75 or 80,000 US dollars per year over there.
What's the
And
cost of renting an apartment or buying a nice house?
well, that's it. You can't buy too much. Most of these countries don't allow you to actually buy real estate as a foreigner, so you're always renting. And the rents are, they're not, they're not Boston rents, but they're not low either. You want to be in Western style housing, and those are, in many cases, are built specifically for expatriates who come into the country. And so the cost of those accommodations are considerably higher than average. So $800 or $1,000 a month for a decent apartment in Ho Chi Minh City is definitely in the cards.
Mm.
How about for the people that are born and live there?
Well, they have their their village homes, and they live in conditions, in densities within a home that would not be acceptable in the West. There might be, in a small home, there might be 8 or 9 people who live there,
Mm.
Yeah, they
and
say that all the
relative and
people-
very cramped quarters, and people are, they sleep there, they cook there, and then they're not in the home. They're not using the home the same way we do.
Well, they have a lot of people, like my nephew took a law course to get his doctorate at BU, and he said there are actually a lot of females getting their master's or doctorate from China, and he says right after that they go right back to the country. In other words, they're sending people here to be educated and then having them go back. And also, I find that all the
I think some of that, I think many of them would be delighted to stay. And we've had this experience ourselves, but trying to get visas for foreign nationals, even with high degrees of education, very difficult, almost impossible right now for a foreigner to get any kind of a permanent residency in the United States, regardless of their education. So, this is another brilliant move from the previous administration, which is basically the world has wanted to send us all of their talent, because everyone wants to come here, and they still do.
But it's like Sharon is one of the best places to live in the country. We're New England.
Yes, absolutely.
But we have 90 different nations here
Yes.
over the past few years, and people say, well, they only the rich are here. From all these countries, the people that come here is because they have money. What's your take on that as being?
Well, again, the only way, the immigration policies have become so restrictive that the only way that you can come into this country from India, Pakistan, China, Vietnam, yes, you can come in as a student under a student visa, but They used to allow you to stay for 1 year to get practical education, continue your practical education under your student visa, and then you had to leave or get a permanent residency in the United States. And it used to be you could get these H-1B visas, sponsored by employers who could, sponsor you to come into this country. And that was essentially a path to a green card. Now it's virtually impossible for any of these foreign nationals who come here for education to stay.
Definitely.
You know, Howard, I grew up in Rhode Island, and at one time, Providence, Rhode Island was the jewelry capital of the world.
Yes.
And once the manufacturing moved to China, there were a lot of factories that either shut down or had to redirect their efforts. Is that kind of typical over the years as the industry has outsourced manufacturing to other countries?
Yes,
Whatever
and
the industry
this is what it happened much earlier in the shoe business. I mean, Brockton in this part of New England was the shoe capital of the United States.
Mhm.
And the shoe companies one after another shut down and moved their operations overseas, and that started in the 60s and 70s, and really accelerated in the 80s. And again, it's this was these are jobs that had high labor content, and as labor costs increased in the United States. In the jewelry industry, there were a lot of manufacturers who are faced with enormous capital expenditures for environmental compliance in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
They're using all kinds of chromium and cyanides and highly toxic materials, and they made a mess of the environment around their plants. And many of these people just ran away and said, "Okay, I'm not going to invest, and I'm not going to clean up, and I'm just going to turn this into a sourcing company, and we'll make everything in Asia, and we'll export our mess to Asia."
Yeah.
And it's really part of what happened. Now, very interestingly, as the standards of living have increased dramatically in Asia, China and Vietnam and all these other places where there's a rising middle class, there's tremendous environmental pressure within these countries as well. What was tolerated 20 years ago is absolutely not tolerated anymore. And so all of these environmental investments are, they really have just been time shifted, but they're happening now in Asia. And the other interesting phenomenon that's occurred, relative to environmental and human rights and wages and all of these social, economic and civil rights issues, is that companies like Adidas, companies like Nike, companies like Puma, companies that we do business with, these major, well-known players with extremely high level of public profile, have insisted, in intensively auditing the operations that they do business with, and third-party auditing, certifications, constant review, regular plant visits. They're always looking at the wage book to ensure that everyone is being paid in full for all of their wages and all of their overtime, that they're not exceeding the limited amount of time per week that they're allowed to work. There's no one under the age of 16 is working in any of these facilities. That to the extent that these plants are producing waste, that there is an action plan and a procedural mechanism for properly and safely disposing of any waste. So there's been this exportation of a lot of Western values through corporate America and Western corporations, that are enlightened. They have exported a lot of this enlightenment into the industrial bases in China, in India, in Indonesia, Vietnam. Everyone talks, likes to perceive of the corporation as this boogeyman that's out to do a lot of bad things, and there's plenty of bad stuff to talk about. But one of the positive forces for social good that I've witnessed in my 40 years in business, and is this transformation of the ethical nature of business, and the proliferation of higher levels of values throughout the world.
That's encouraging.
It is.
Hey, Howard, you're also an attorney, and you were going to bring up, I don't know how much time we have, but I'm sure there's enough time to talk about, you were going to give advice of people starting their own business because of the COVID. Do you see more of that? More of people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing a lot of it, and I'm seeing some of it, and so much business is being enabled by the internet, where people are doing, creating home businesses, and they're selling on eBay or Etsy, or these various marketplaces that are out there. The other thing is that people are being required to work from home, and I'm sitting in a home office right now. That's using the space, the light, the internet, the electricity of the home, and so to the extent that you have transformed a part of your house into an actual business operation, there may be some tax deductions that you're eligible to take as a legitimate home-based business.
Got a caveat on that though. I don't know if it's still, because that's what they look for at the IRS when they want to audit you.
Well, like I said, they can audit if they want to, but if you do it properly and you keep your documents, it's not an issue.
They look at other things too. I was audited years ago. I never went through anything like that. And I mean, in the end, they said, they got to find something.
Of course they do. Yeah.
So,
We've been through audits, and the usual thing that happens in a business audit is that they said, well, you recognize this expense in 2015. It was really a 2016 expense, and you recognize this income in 2016 that you probably should have recognized in 2015. And so you do all the swapping around, and you end up refiling your tax returns. The net effect is that over the 2 years, you had the same amount of expense and the same amount of income, but they, by moving the timing around, they can charge you some fees, and you have to refile tax returns. And
my advice on getting rid of them is you borrow somebody's little kids, 3 or 4, and while they're there, besides having the lights blink on and off, have the kids running around and around and around, and that gets rid of them.
I'll just let our dogs run around. They'll get nipped and they'll leave.
That's even better.
I've got one dog in particular that would not respond well to an IRS agent, or anyone else for that matter.
We'll get Camille's husband Jim after them too.
But actually, my experience with IRS on in terms of business audit is really a high degree of professionalism, and we've always treated these people with total respect, and it's very easy to be audited when you're operating your business properly and you're paying all your taxes and you're a responsible corporate citizen. It's like, yeah, there are areas of interpretation, and they do have to find something. But I've also had audits where people just threw up their hands and said, "I'm going home. There's nothing here." So, but
when they walk in smiling, that's when you gotta watch out.
Well, look, I mean, it's there's actually been a tremendous reduction in the number of audits that have been conducted, and they're going after middle income people more than these super high income people. The super high income people have troops of lawyers and accountants. It's very complicated for the IRS to audit these very, very wealthy people. It's much easier for them to come in and more or less intimidate a small business owner and squeeze a few bucks out of them.
Yeah. Right.
This has been very, we have 1 minute, and that's enough for Camille to close and for us to thank you. Thank you. You are fascinating. I can see why Veronica took to you.
Well,
We love her.
I suppose we're a power couple, and balancing the work and the travel and the relationship stuff. I mean, that's a whole nother show.
Yeah,
It
we'll
sure
do that
is.
next time. Camille always winds up.
Well, this has been very enlightening. I'd love to have more of this conversation, but
Yeah,
especially
okay,
about the
yeah.
international economy and all the things that go along with that. But we don't have the time now, so we'll have to
Sure.
have you back.
Well, I'd be
Yeah.
delighted to come back, and
Thank you.
it's great that this show exists, and people need honest advice, and
Exactly.
because there are so many people who when they want to give you advice, they have a hidden agenda, and I
Sure.
think that's that's the value that you can certainly bring to the
Oh, this
public here.
program, it's uploaded to YouTube. We have a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So people anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world can see this once we post it.
We have to end. Guys
All
have
right.
to go.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And to our viewers, thank you for watching. Please let us know if you have any questions or if you have any other ideas about programs, because remember, this is your show, the law, your
Your
money,
money,
and you.
You.
Thanks.
Thank you.